with all that out of the way, let's dive headfirst into this mailbag. We'll begin with the NBA Chicken, frequent question asker. They ask, how much longer until Portland makes a decision regarding blowing it up or making a major move? This trade deadline, next season? Outside of CJ for Ben Simmons, I'm not sure what other move makes sense. I would say we've been here before, but they're nearly at the bottom of the West now. Yeah, they're in this weird situation. I think with Portland specifically, Neil O'Shea, before he was fired, deserved a ton of criticism, even though they experienced some success under his tenure on the basketball court, specifically anyway. I think I liked a lot of his moves that he made on their own. Norm Powell for Gary Trent Jr., I feel like that ended up being a win-win for both teams, to be honest with you. I liked Larry Nance Jr. trade. I liked Robert Covington trade at the time, but they never really went for it. It was always sort of these, not moves on the margins, but these like half significant moves where if there were stars that came out of the market, you never saw them go all in, maybe because they were too market aware, self-aware, knowing that they weren't going to keep these guys. If it was a Kawhi Leonard, if it was a Paul George, if it was a Jimmy Butler, but knowing how good Dame has been for quite some time, they really did fail to kind of make that all-in move, whatever it was. And a lot of people point to a wing, but it might have been a different type of big other than Jusuf Nurkic at some point. It became pretty clear early on that you were going to be capped without the infusion of another player when looking at a CJ McCollum or Damian Lillard backcourt. I'm not even sure that you needed to break it up, but it's probably something that needed to be explored more seriously before now. This season specifically, I would be mildly to moderately shocked if they move a CJ McCollum. They're not moving Dame. Let's get beyond there. If they move a Norman Powell or a CJ McCollum, part of that is I don't know how much influence or authority Joe Cronin has as an interim GM, even though he's been with the organization for a while and will probably be in the running, we assume, for that top job this offseason. I'm just not sure if they're going to give him the license to make such a wholesale decision when you are so far out of the Western Conference contention picture right now. Chauncey Billups has talked about maybe shutting Dame down for an extensive period of time so he can heal up from that abdominal injury that has apparently bothered him for years at this point. If you're going that route, I think what you're probably going to see them do is hold serve and maybe look at shopping their soon-to-be free agents. I'd be a little bit surprised if Anthony Simons was among them. He's having a great year, and I don't know that they need to fear his restricted free agency necessarily. They have the leverage to match, and I look at the cap space landscape and the teams that are slated to have the most. I don't know that any of them are going to go give Simons this huge offer. If you don't want to pay him, there are probably sign and trade scenarios that will be open to you, and it'll be easier to capitalize on his departure when he's a larger outgoing salary. That leaves Nurkic and Robert Covington, to me, as the most likely players to be moved. I don't know what you can get for Nurkic. The big man market is so saturated, even though there are some teams like everyone's going to mention Charlotte that could use a center. I don't know that he definitely doesn't fit in Charlotte to me. It's just someone who isn't necessarily going to run the floor with them. And I don't know that he improves their defense at all, even if they are playing drop coverage, but he is a good player. Can make a lot of passes in the short roll from a standstill. He's improved his finishing around the rim. He has those little flip shots. And again, I think he can work better than a lot of other bigs if you're going to put him into drop. The Portland has just tried to be a lot more aggressive in the pick and roll this year, which has kind of hurt him. Rocco, we've seen his shooting really regress this season. Maybe he picks it up on a better team. He's played a little bit better since he was demoted from the starting five. I still think he can bring you some solid team defense, and he fits the 3-and-D concept, which teams are naturally going to want. A trade that I had proposed or that I just filed about, so we were talking about it before it's even live, but peek behind the curtain there. And I wrote it while having COVID. So maybe this is COVID brain here. But if it's basically a Robert Covington for Nerlens Noel swap, maybe New York has to send a protected second, top 44 protected second to Portland to get that done. What that move does is it gets Portland out of the tax for this year. And then it sort of gives them this cheap big who they can use in more aggressive pick and roll schemes, at least relative to Nurkic. And Nerlens Noel is a pretty good rim protector, will give you at least more of a rim running threat than I guess Nurkic is, but not really. Nurkic is going to do more stuff in that situation. He's clearly more limited on offense is the point, but he's under contract for 9.3 million next season. That's some insurance against Nurkic leaving if you don't want to pay him big money. And it's just cheap enough to where, okay, we have this rotation big. If he's a backup, we're not paying him that much money to the point that we mind having him be a second stringer. Maybe he's even starting for you, but that's someone who gives you 20 to 25 minutes per game. And again, I think Portland, knowing this season is about to be punted on, it seems like you want to get out of the tax. And a team like the Knicks really just needs more two-way wingish players because there's RJ Barrett for them, and that's really it. Unless you consider Quentin Grimes a huge part of their immediate outlook this season. Covington can come off the bench, probably get some real minutes for them. I don't think he fixes their defense, but I think he opens up different lineup combinations. If Nerlens Noel is not there, you do have Mitchell Robinson, you have Taj Gibson. Maybe the Knicks are more willing to play Julius Randle at center with Rocco at the 4, or maybe they're just more willing to explore the Obi Toppin and Julius Randle front courts there. But that type of a move. Larry Nance Jr. is someone I thought about. I think a team like Charlotte, maybe they would come in with an offer of Kelly Oubre Jr., Kai Jones, and a second for Larry Nance Jr. I would give up that much for Larry Nance on the Hornets, just to be clear. I think Oubre is not going to factor into their long-term future if they want to keep Miles Bridges, PJ Washington, and Gordon Hayward together. They're already paying Terry Rozier. Oubre's on this sort of placeholder deal, has only part of his salary next season guaranteed. He's had a pretty good year. Shooting is cooled, but he gives you some just defensive options up the positional spectrum that, Portland could use. And looking at Rocco probably leaving this summer, having the ability to keep Kelly Oubre Jr. for, I think it's $12.6 million would be his full guaranteed salary next year. That's something that could interest them. But I don't know why you move Nance, because he is also insurance against Nurkic leaving, just to have that real big on the roster, even if you don't want him playing the 5 all the time. But I would love to see Nance in Charlotte. And so if you're really going to lean into sort of seller's mode, moving Larry Nance Jr. is definitely a smaller scale undertaking compared to a CJ McCollum or Norman Powell or Damian Lillard, just one relative to what Dame means to the franchise, but just looking at the magnitude of the contracts of a Norman Powell, CJ McCollum, and Dame deal. The other thing I'll say about the Blazers, and it would probably take an about face on Philly's part. They seem to want someone who qualifies as at least a fringe all-star in a Ben Simmons trade. I still think if you build out a package around Larry Nance, Norman Powell, picks and swaps for Ben Simmons, if I'm Philly, I'm thinking about that, because that's still ingredients for another trade down the line. And then Norman Powell helps you out a ton immediately. And I know that you've had some success with Andre Drummond this season, with George Niang at points, but Larry Nance Jr. would be a hell of sort of a big dev coming off the bench. You could try playing him with Joel Embiid, even though I wouldn't necessarily suggest it in high volume. I would just, given where Ben Simmons' value seems to be, unless there's just a trade that we don't know about out there, Powell, Nance, plus picks and swaps, I think that could, I don't think it does. It definitely helps the Sixers, but I think that's a longer term haul that you can justify if they're them, where it's, hey, maybe we keep these players and they help Embiid immediately, but also between Powell and Nance, and then again, picks and swaps, you should be able to go out and build a different package should a star become available, because we don't even know how interested Portland will be in Simmons if Dame ever becomes available, if it's this offseason. Ditto for Washington and Beal, where that would probably be a sign and trade scenario this summer unless he's opting in. How much do they actually want to start rebuilding around Ben Simmons if they're moving Bradley Beal? Just something to consider there. I do expect Portland to do something at the trade deadline, because if they're going to shut down Dame, this season is over. And I would think Rocco and Nurkic will be heavily involved in trade rumors. And I would bet money on one of them probably being moved. And I don't think a Nance trade is out of the question. I just don't know that you really need to make that call if you're not doing anything with the rest of your roster outside of Rocco and Nurkic there.